Hello, I'm Dan Feinberg from The Hollywood Reporter. We're here today with Peter Morgan, writer, creator, producer of Netflix's The Crown, which is up for... How many Emmys is The Crown up for?
13, Dan.
13. Excellent. I knew it was somewhere between 11 and 15, but I figured you would know the answer. And I assume you've been talking a lot about the show's Emmy hopes for probably a couple months now. What is that process like, the going through the gauntlet of pre-awards stuff?
Actually, I haven't been talking about it because I've been in London making the second season, and in London, you know, our awards calendar is very different. We have the BAFTAs, and then we get little or no sense of what's happening over here, and when you come here, it's quite a shock because it's, you know. I have some experience of this from films being on what they call award season, and you know, it's a very different experience. We in England, you don't campaign. There's no industry around it, and so when you come here and get caught up in all this, it feels like a whole other side of. It feels like show business. You know, it's a big thing.
Is it daunting? Is it something that sort of feels anathema to the process as you like to participate in it? I assume you like to make the shows and then let things happen afterwards, or the movies.
I can't imagine anybody, thinking, "Oh, good, it's award season," because it feels. Even in the I mean, of course, it's lovely to win. I've had some experience of winning, and I've had a lot of experience of not winning. Of course, winning is nicer, but either you can't take it too seriously, and yet at the same time, it's taken extraordinarily seriously, and you don't want to let down people. You don't want to let down people for whom it makes a big financial difference. Often the distributors or the street or the company like Netflix. So I'd love us to win, but equally I can't bear being put into a competition as the reward for having hopefully done good work, that you end up turning colleagues and other shows that you admire into some kind of race, which is, so it is. Of course, it's counterintuitive to the artistic process, but it seems to be a really established part of the industry now.
Well, it's funny because some people, when they get nominations, they go, "Oh, we never thought this would be a contender, or we never thought this was the kind of thing that gets nominations." But you traditionally do write things that tend to lend themselves ultimately to awards down the line. You work in a genre that is award friendly. How hard is it for you to not think about that at the end of the tunnel?
I promise you, I don't. I really promise you I don't. I really don't. I just, I do what I do. I think that, I really care that people like what I do, or the work is as good as it possibly can be. Sometimes the circumstances don't permit, or sometimes you don't do the best possible work. But I try to make it good. If as a consequence of doing the best possible work that you end up talking to you. But if
I like being represented as the light at the end of the tunnel, or maybe the darkness at the end of the tunnel. I'm not sure which one it is, but
listen, I'd hate to not be here, right? So I'd hate that would be that. I'd hate to not be here, and I'm it's a privilege to be here.
You've obviously had to do a lot of interviews associated with this show. Are there different questions that British journalists ask compared to American journalists, given sort of the investment that they have in the subject matter?
I have done almost no interviews at all. In the UK, for example, the royal family, anything to do with the royal family, it's almost a haemophiliac issue. If you touch it, it bruises. You've got to be so careful. What you say, you can be misinterpreted. I think it would be the same as if you were to make even an offhand remark about the presidency here or about Donald Trump. It would, if you're in a conspicuous position, it flies. And so I elect to do almost no press or almost no interviews whatsoever. I also personally, my view is that it's not a good thing if you know who the writer is or what the writer looks like. I prefer my writers to be anonymous so that I don't picture them, and I prefer my writing to to do all the talking for me. I don't particularly like appearing.
Do you ever read interviews with writers yourself? Or do you just simply avoid the genre, as it were, entirely?
No, I will read. If there's somebody whose work I admire, I will read about it. But mostly, I'll do that as a consequence of having watched a show that I particularly enjoy. And I must say, I would be very keen to meet or to watch a good interview with other showrunners. The challenge of showrunning, particularly at a time where the sands are shifting so much, in the industry and the way that television is perceived and consumed. It's such a rapidly changing, area that we're all in, that to have a conversation with other people doing my job would just be lovely. But then I would imagine anybody would find that interesting, talking to other people doing their job.
Well, it's funny because it's such a cottage industry, the sort of post-mortem interview that everyone who runs a show has to do after basically every episode of a show, explaining exactly what happened in that episode. And I've conducted many of those interviews myself, and it's a weird thing to have to do that. And I guess I'm glad for you that you don't that you don't have to analyze each episode of this show after having it released, I guess.
Yeah, I'm grateful for that too. I wouldn't do it. I just wouldn't do it. I mean, I'm genuinely, I'm talking to, I think, 3 people out here on this trip, and I won't talk to anyone else. So.
Well, have you gotten your finger on the pulse of reactions in the UK and how people have responded at all?
Well, I mean, I got a sense just from text messages or from emails, and people don't need to send those. You know what I mean? Sure. When you meet people face to face, then of course they're not gonna they're not gonna tell you suck. But I got a disproportionate electronic traffic, but I think it is interpreted differently. I haven't travelled enough because I've been so busy doing this damn thing that to get a sense of how it's gone down internationally, and I think also Netflix's penetration in the international market is it's just growing. So I'm hoping that with the second season there'll be more subscribers. It will have penetrated more markets, and this extraordinarily exciting thing about going day and date in all these countries at once. I mean, it's sort of breathtaking the speed at which things are changing, and that definitely has galvanized me in the writing. That I feel that I'm part of an industry and a technology within the industry that is disrupting and changing and moving things forward, and that inspires me. I love that.
Well, does the day and date and the binge process make a particular sense to you as a writer who wrote every episode of this? Sort of, you wrote it as a binge process yourself. So does it make a certain sense to you that viewers are viewing it in a comparable way?
Yeah, I love the fact that I have no control over how the viewers are watching it. In the past you have so much control. You write to commercial breaks, you write to episode lengths. You knew that there was a week's gap between, so you're writing in a particular way with cliffhangers. Within the episode, you're shaping it around a fixed timeline. Now it's open season, and the one of. I'm almost more curious to ask people how they watched it, where they watched it, in what segments, in what configuration, on a big screen, on a small screen, because we're making this in the way that I've had an active career in the theatre and in feature films, and we're making this show like a film. There's nothing different about the way we're making The Crown to the way that I made Frost Nixon, The Queen, The Last King of Scotland, Rush. And it's that kind of a bespoke experience, and I'm wondering how are people watching it. Some people watch it some people are watching it one a night. Some people are watching 4 or 5 in one go, and that you can't write to suit everybody's viewing habits. So I do know that anecdotally people say that 2 or 3 hours is quite common. So as I'm writing, subsequent seasons, as I'm learning a little bit more about this, I am writing sometimes in 2s, sometimes as a triplet, sometimes a single episode, to really kind of shake things up and make the flow inside a season be more interesting.
Now, obviously, there's no technically wrong way to watch the show, but have you heard any sort of viewership experience where you just went, that's not how you're supposed to be doing it? You know, like someone watching it on a tiny phone 10 hours straight or something like that.
No, it wouldn't upset me. It really wouldn't. It might upset the cinematographer or the production designer, but you know, this is where we are now. It's, you know, and I'm sort of agog at how people are watching. You know, I think as it's changing, you know, I'm sad that people are saying no, cinema has to be cinema and television has to be cinema. This is such a movable thing now, the way in which we're doing all this, and it's disappointing to read people being so trenchant about, you know, how a media needs to be consumed. It's a film, it must be consumed in this way. People are consuming, thinking they're watching two things at once, and they seem to be. I came over on a plane. I was watching somebody. They were emailing, and they didn't seem to be less focused. Normally, I'd have said, "For heaven's sake, you know, what are you doing, man? Concentrate. What's the matter with you?" And but he seemed to be completely able to do two things at once. I don't know what it's doing to our brains. You know,
scrambling him is the easy answer, but
yeah, it's happening, and to pretend that it isn't happening is foolish. It's happening, and it's exciting.
What was Claire's last day on set like in season 2?
Well, we kept having these goodbyes, and it was, you know, there was a sense of relief for her, I think, because I think 2 seasons of very hard work carrying a show like that, you know, that takes its toll, and I think she really felt she'd got to the end. I think she'd really felt she'd done her bit, you know, and she was ready. But I wasn't ready to let her go, and so I kept coming up with extra reshoots, and that were completely unnecessary and completely spurious. Although that said, every time I looked at an episode in post and it wasn't quite working, or you know, the pieces, putting Claire in it would orientate it, root it, and I felt such a strong connection to her as a writer. You know, I was writing for that face.
Well, you've been talking basically the whole time about the need to recast at a certain point. Was there any part of you in season 2 that sort of started toying with the idea of, well, maybe we could see what the makeup would look like? You know, maybe we can try it and maybe it'll be okay just to keep her around?
No, I don't think so. I think I'd sooner stop altogether than disfigure the poor woman. She, you know, she's done. No, it's sort of perfect what she's done, and also, you know, she represents. If we are going to go forward, it's not just the face that changes with age. It's experience of life, and she in her own personal life has just had one child. She's a brand new mother. You couldn't ask her to inhabit the soul of somebody who'd had 4 children. And I mean, I know that there's acting, but then there are other sort of kind of deeper things things that you wear in your face and in your air and in your spirit. And I couldn't ask her to wear the scars of that many battles, you know, as a human being and as a mother, as a wife. You know, it needs to be now. If it continues, it needs to be a woman with genuine experience of life, or deeper experience of life.
Well, you say if it continues, but you're assuming it's going to continue, of course, right?
Well, there's will on both sides,
sure.
but we haven't pressed the button yet, and pressing the button is contingent upon finding the right group of people, making sure I've got the right stories, everybody still having the energy. You know, it's right now we're still in that transitional period where people's expectations are for cinematic television at cinematic levels. But they are still somehow demanding 10 episodes a year, which is like the old television.
Sure.
And we've got to be careful you don't burn people out that way.
I don't know how to tell you this, but a lot of American TV shows do 22 or 24.
It's just sort of unimaginable. and I every day I send compassion and hugs to all the showrunners out there. I do.
Well, but Netflix is always so big about we make our own rules, it's our own thing. Surely if you came to them and said season 3 is going to be 6 episodes and that's how many it's going to be, they would just nod politely and let you do it, right?
I think so. I mean, they would. I think they'd first express disappointment, but I think they would. And you read about. The creator of Fargo saying it's just not ready yet and therefore it won't, and in FX he had a supportive group of executives that sort of said, well, you can't just tell when it's ready, it's ready. And that's a fantastically broad-minded attitude to the creative process.
What is the actual search process going to look like? Like, are you actually going to read 50 actresses, or are you going to go in saying, I have 5 people I want to take over Queen Elizabeth? How actually searching is it going to be, do you imagine?
Well, no, but I think, you see, that would be more when it was the younger Queen.
Sure.
By the time you're looking at someone who's going to be ultimately in their mid-40s, maybe even 50, by and large, the good ones will have risen to the top already. And there won't be such a question of discovery. But I've got a world-class casting director in Nina Gold, and I generally follow her advice. It's very rare that we disagree.
And is this all moving along till eventually Helen Mirren can get back in the crown, or would you actually want to avoid that specifically, having been there and done that?
I think probably she would more like to avoid it. She's been a fantastic friend and queen, for me. And no, really, she has. And I don't. If she feels that she still has something to give, if I feel I still have something to write by that point, one step at a time.
And when we talked before the start of the first season, you said that the first season was kind of a superhero origin story for Elizabeth. What is the second season by that standard?
Well, if at the beginning of the first season you've got people marrying in the first episode and really finding their way and having this dreadful bombshell dropped on them, and by the second season it's 10 years on, and any marriage that's 10 years old will have its complexities, have its issues. People are older, so I think you'll find a marriage that's more shaded, is experiencing more challenges. I think you'll find her being better and more grounded and more established in her role. And I think you'll find that whatever cracks there were in her relationships, both with her mother, with her sister, they will only have deepened with time. And so things are just a little darker.
And you mentioned trying to write in sort of different 2-episode or 3-episode blocks. Is there anything like the Sutherland-Churchill episode in the second season?
Yeah, there is. Not
literally the same, obviously.
It doesn't revolve around a portrait or something, but there are some surprising, duets, that we've unearthed in our research. I have 8 full-time researchers. Imagine, it's so wonderful, and they're constantly throwing up discoveries. We're pretty thorough, and so I hope there'll be a lot of things that I always take myself as a yardstick. If I don't know something in this field, then it's likely that most people won't, because I've just spent more time reading around this. So when I find something that surprises me, I think it's a pretty safe bet that it will surprise others. And I've learned so many things this last season.
Have there been any sort of corrections made by experts to things in the first season where you're like, yeah, we kind of blew that one?
Yeah, heads will roll in the research department. I know they're very keen. They're all like really keen. Of course, all history is interpretation.
Sure.
And presumably some people will have things to say about that, but my gang is pretty thorough, and they take it as a badge of honor that what they fed me is that I can trust it.
And just the last question, you've been so busy putting the finishing touches on the second season. Have you watched any TV this summer at all?
Well, I have actually. I have. I've watched a number of the other shows that have been nominated. I've watched documentaries. Ultimately, if I'm writing my own stuff, I do retreat often to documentaries, because it's a place where I can switch off without thinking, God, why didn't I do something like that? If I watch other drama, I often think, oh, that's so. I sort of think, I wish we did a bit more of that, or So sometimes I need to put that aside if I want to have an evening off, and I, the rise of the documentary as both in feature film, but also the spectacular OJ documentary. That's a joy for me. My life is now, I'm a wall-to-wall documentary guy.
So what have you particularly enjoyed that you watched this summer?
I enjoyed as dramas. I enjoyed Stranger Things. I enjoyed Handmaid's Tale. I enjoyed on documentary side. I enjoyed The OJ. I enjoyed The Keepers. I enjoyed Jinx. But I have been kind of too busy reading to watch as much as is on offer. I mean, how do you make an impression on what's on offer? I mean, there's a lot to watch.
That's my day-to-day job.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. We've been talking with Peter Morgan, creator of The Crown.